Okay, I think we're good. Let me just get my browser up and running. Now let's get started. Okay, hello everyone. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel, and welcome to today's I Love Jeet Kune broadcast. This is broadcast number 20, and this is the one about Jeet Kune FAQs and SAQs. So I'm pretty sure you are all quite familiar with the term FAQ, which stands for Frequently Asked Questions, but you might not be as familiar with the term SAQ, right? And give me 1 second. My my laptop just died on me. I got to plug it in. Sorry, guys. Hang on 1 second. As I like to say, talk amongst yourselves. Okay, sorry about that. I was so intent today on being Mr. Professional and and not having a whole lot of stuff go wrong, because one of the things that I discovered is that the broadcast is becoming more and more popular, better known, and so every week we have a greater number of people signing in and attending the live broadcast. And so today is hardly the day on which, excuse me, today is hardly the day on which I want or need my laptop to die on me, right? So, but that should be taken care of. So the whole SAQ, the should ask questions, that's something that I was introduced to back in the days of, when I was running my school and studying sales and marketing. And so the SAQs are questions that people should be asking about your product or your service if they knew a lot about it and they knew the questions to ask, right? But usually we deal with people who ask the same questions over and over again, and that's where we got the element known as the FAQ. Oh, let me do the t-shirt thing. Pretty cool. This is actually one of my favorites. All right. So, probably for me personally, one of the most frequently asked one of the most frequently asked questions that I come across is this whole idea about, could Bruce Lee beat, so and so top UFC fighter in his prime, right? So of course people ask this because today, to a certain degree, people see the UFC and MMA as the ultimate expression of martial arts skill. And since Bruce Lee is considered to be one of the world's greatest martial artists ever, then of course people wonder how would Bruce Lee fare in such a competition. And that's the big differentiation right there, because there's martial art and then there's martial sport, right? And so being a pragmatist, I guess, if Bruce Lee had decided to get into MMA competition, then I think we can be fairly sure that he would train specifically to come out on top in that realm, if you understand what I'm saying, right? So I'm going to let my imagination go off here, right? And say that I think then that Bruce Lee would have trained, let's say, in Muay Thai and in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and wrestling. But he probably would have modified his Muay Thai so that in addition to having the powerful rear round kick, right, he'd also have a powerful lead round kick, because he would have realized that everybody is afraid of Thai boxing's rear kick. So then you could probably catch him off guard with a lead kick, and that would be the application of the JKD theory of longest weapon to closest target. Right? Now, by the way, have you noticed that in the UFC, current UFC, there are a lot of people now applying a lead leg kick to the lower parts of their opponent's body. So there are people kicking on top of the knee and what have you, and that's become very common. The oblique kick is another thing that has become very common, which I think they probably got it from the fight with Chuck Norris in Way of the Dragon. Right? But Bruce Lee would also have investigated, we're still imagining stuff here now, okay guys? Bruce Lee would also have investigated the different ways to counter, let's say, the striking in MMA with striking, but then counter the striking in MMA with grappling, and then do the same thing for grappling. Learn to counter grappling with grappling, and then counter grappling with striking. And I'm pretty sure of this, right? Because I talked to you guys about this before. So this is Jeet Kune, Bruce Lee's commentaries on the martial way, and this is page 137 for those of you who have it. And it's a section in here where he's talking about grappling and throwing factors that all martial artists should consider. So it's grappling, and if you were on I think it was just last week that we did this, right? Grappling and throwing as an attack, grappling and throwing as a counter, grappling and throwing and hitting and kicking, or vice versa, as attack, as counter, and on and on and on and on. There's a whole little breakdown of what I consider to be the evidence that Bruce Lee had every bit of an intention of investigating the heck out of the grappling methodology and really, as people would say, mixing things up, right? There's even a thing here about a section that says joint lock factors that all martial artists should consider. So joint lock as a stand-in attack, joint lock as a stand-in counter, joint locks with grappling and throwing. So he's talking about going to the ground, right? And this is, I don't even know when these notes were made, right? But joint locks with grappling and throwing and or hitting / kicking or vice versa. Let me see if I can put this up to the camera so you guys can see what the heck I'm talking about. I can't do it. I still don't have that down. But it's an amazing insight, I think, into where Bruce Lee's intention was to go with the grappling thing. So I think quite rightly, all of the people in the JKD world who have now, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a few seconds too, all the people in the JKD world who have embraced the heck out of grappling, I think it's built into the Jeet Kune idea of developing well-roundedness, right? So on page 138, is this it? I'm gonna get this down one of these days, guys, without knocking over the camera, right? It says ground lock factors that all martial artists should consider: ground subduing with hitting and kicking or grappling and throwing, and the whole stuff as an attack or as a counter, right? And then countering ground locks and subduing, right? Then there's stuff on wrestling notes and what have you. So there's okay, let me interrupt for a second here. So Ryan, no, this is not the Tao. This is Bruce Lee's. This one I can do. Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune commentaries on the martial way. So what this is, Ryan, is, let's call it, for lack of a different expression, let's call it a follow-up to the Tao of Jeet Kune, right? Because the Tao, which is what, 1977, I think, that was when Linda Lee gave Gilbert Johnson access to some of Bruce Lee's notes, and then with the aid of people like Dan Inosanto and Ted Wong and other people from the JKD world at that time, they were able to bring the Tao into book form. But then many years later, during the time of the Jeet Kune nucleus, then John Little was given even more access, greater access to Bruce Lee's notes, and then he developed his entire series of books. We probably, I think, in the last four broadcasts, we have referenced that book, right? Because they're, everybody has like their favorite Bruce Lee books and what have you. And I always recommend to people that they go beyond the Tao, because the Tao it's a landmark tome, but it's not all that there is in terms of gaining access to Bruce Lee's, let's call it Bruce Lee's mind, right? So you have to go past the Tao of Jeet Kune at some point, right? So to get back to the question of Bruce Lee in the UFC, right? I think it's safe to assume that because we're still doing imaginary stuff, right? It's safe to assume that he would have spent more time with people like Jean LaBelle, and I'm sure that he and Dan Inosanto, sometimes I say that if you want to get an idea, even though their personalities are completely different, and of course they're completely different people, but what Dan Inosanto and Bruce Lee had in common was this insatiable curiosity and insatiable appetite for martial art research, right? So I sometimes say that if you want an idea, maybe not the identical path, but if you want an idea of how Bruce Lee might have evolved, then take a look at Dan Inosanto. So in my imaginary world, Bruce Lee and Dan Inosanto would have worked out with the Gracies and the Machados, just like in his lifetime, Bruce Lee worked out with Joe Louis and Chuck Norris and Mike Stone and Louis Delgado, because those guys were the top fighters at the time, right? So I think that following that rationale, if the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the MMA people are the top fighters at that time, I think that Bruce Lee would have associated with them, and probably there would have been benefit, from either direction. So in final analysis, in answer to that question, how would Bruce Lee fare in the UFC? I think he would have done really well in his weight class. And I don't know if he would have gone on to be a professional fighter, because that was never really his thing. But I think that whether he won or not, he probably would have gone on to still make great martial art movies, right? Okay, so FAQ number 2, question number 2, frequently asked question number 2. And this is sometimes voiced differently, right? But I chose this one. Would Bruce Lee be happy with the way Dan Inosanto has evolved Jeet Kune Do, right? So I don't think that it's correct to say that Dan Inosanto has evolved Jeet Kune Do, right? The evolution of Jeet Kune Do is a thing that takes place organically, right? On its own, and everybody's experience of Jeet Kune Do is going to be a little bit different. There will be commonalities and similarities because there is one Jeet Kune Do, even though it's expressed in different languages, and you'll see in a few minutes where I got that from, right? But this is a tricky one, because I think Sifu Inosanto has gone down two paths. Well, one of which is entirely visible, and then the other one which is perhaps not as visible, right? So back in the early days, like in the Chinatown school, right? And maybe to a certain degree, even in his own backyard. So if you know the history, the Chinatown school, I think, was opened up in '68 or something, and it operated for a couple of years. And then in 1970, when Sijo Bruce went off to Hong Kong, he told Sifu Dan to close the Chinatown school and then take like the most dedicated people to his backyard and train them there, right? So I think that in the Chinatown school for sure, and then possibly to a certain degree in the backyard, Sifu Dan may have kept closer to the Jeet Kune Do curriculum as was set by Bruce Lee. But then I think where things changed, right? And this is something that will be up for debate, right? But I think that where things change is when the seminar circuit came along, and he had to change things up, as they say. And that's where the idea of showing the concepts of Jeet Kune Do by using other arts came along. So would Bruce Lee have been happy with this approach? I'm going to go out on a limb. I don't think that approach would have been necessary if Bruce Lee had lived. I don't see how Bruce Lee would have become a seminar instructor. And that's why I say that the evolution of Jeet Kune Do is going to be different for the different practitioners of Jeet Kune Do, right? Even though there are going to be commonalities and similarities, right? I can see, well, let's do some imaginary stuff again, right? So I can see a world in which Dan Inosanto continued to teach while Bruce Lee was off making movies, right? But then when Bruce Lee would come back to Los Angeles from being somewhere in the world making a movie, then the two of them would get together and Inasano would they would collaborate like they did, right? And Inasano would perhaps he would share more of his discoveries in Filipino Kali, right? Maybe even showing him what he's been getting from the Machados in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and what have you, right? So don't give me no grief. This is just Dwight Woods imagining stuff, all right? I think it's really cool, and in preparing for these broadcasts, even though it might not look like if I spend time working on them, I go back to a lot of my old Jeet Kune material, because like my senior Cass Magda has told me, Jeet Kune is such a transcendent art, and sometimes we don't realize that. This is me paraphrasing what Cass has said, right? Sometimes we don't realize that in the old days there was perhaps a little bit more truth, and there was perhaps a little bit more accuracy in the way that people spoke about Jeet Kune, right? So I go back to the old material because you can find some gems of knowledge and information, and I think that Sifu Inasano, quite like Bruce Lee, was ahead of his time, because he wrote. I think it's in here. This is the Art and Philosophy book. Let me see if I think it's here. Page 151, right? He says, where is it? Those of us who have elected to teach certain phases of Jeet Kune try to do so with as little fanfare as possible, which means that each prospective student is screened very carefully. See, that's 1970 something. You see, so that's before the modern era of the seminar circuit. I think on the seminar circuit, things had to change, because now people were being exposed. More people were being exposed to the phases of Jeet Kune. And so it wasn't possible to do it in the small group setting or even in the one-on-one setting, which is what people might have been more used to in the early days, right? So, and then when you consider that, like he says, those of us who have elected to teach certain phases of Jeet Kune. So those Jeet Kune instructors who elected to teach certain phases, you have to remember that as things evolved, those instructors certified people of their own as instructors. So in my example, I started training with Dan Inasano in 1983, right? So I've spent 35 years with him, right? And so now I am a certified instructor in my own right. But what am I trying to say, right? So there's going to be there's going to be dissemination of the information, but it's not going to be identical, because we're not talking about a martial art method which is fixed in time even, right? Or fixed in nature, because it's Jeet Kune. If we were talking about black belts in Shotokan, y'all know I like to pick on Shotokan a lot, but if we were talking about black belts in Shotokan, right? I have never come across anybody in the Shotokan world who teaches it any differently from the way that it's been taught since forever. Now, I'm sure that Shotokan people would probably tell me, oh no, there have been innovations in this and this and this and this, but I don't think that anybody has innovated in Shotokan so much to the point where they have gotten rid of the series of kata known as the Heians, right? Heian, Shodan, Nidan, and Sandan. I don't think anybody's done that. In Jeet Kune, there are certain things that some people will have gotten rid of, right? So, for example, some people do not believe in the Chisao method, right? We can find pictorial evidence. We have all been trained in Chisao, but there are some people who have dumped the Chisao as part of their evolution, part of their development. Likewise, the similar drill, the Hubad Lubad from the Filipino Kali, there are people who have dropped that also, right? So, and in the final analysis, right, let me go out on a limb again, it's probably true that all of that has to be done, because ultimately Jeet Kune is a personal experience thing, right? Okay, I'll come back to that in a second. And you know what? It's quite evident. if you take a look at all the comments that we get here at I Love Jeet Kune Do, right? When we post a video or we put up a new ad for the Quick Skill series or something, right? Which is available at ilovejeetkunዶ.com, by the way, right? Volume 1, right? You can immediately tell that there is a division amongst even the Jeet Kune Do, the I Love Jeet Kune Do members, right? Who are a diverse group, because some are practitioners, some are Bruce Lee fans, some are instructors, and some are school owners, right? And I was thinking of that when I read this. So again, it's in this book. It's on page 151, and it's where Sifu Dan is talking about. Let me see. All in all. Let's see, he says, all in all, though, written literature and limited instruction, no matter how competent, are not enough to ensure the continued evolution of Jeet Kune Do. So remember, right? So even though this book, my copy here is copyrighted 1980, apparently this book was actually released in 1976. This is what I've been told by authorities in Jeet Kune Do, right? So let me read it to you again. All in all, though, written literature and limited instruction, no matter how competent, are not enough to ensure the continued evolution of Jeet Kune Do, right? He says, there is, however, a more all-inclusive influence that has tended to provide the impetus for the further development of JKD in a manner befitting the memory of Bruce Lee. 2 of the original 4 persons Bruce authorized to teach his art, himself and James Lee, are gone, and now a new breed is moving into the picture. Some can trace their lineage directly to the founder. Others have only read about him or seen him in the movies, right? So he's talking about people teaching, but that statement, that sentence can relate directly to the types of people that we have here on the Facebook group, right? So let me finish up what he says here. Some, like myself, have studied numerous arts for many years, but many have never thrown a sidekick, torqued a punch, been in a street fight, or seen the inside of a goon, right? So that's it right there, written 40-something years ago and describing today's situation, right? So it is complicated. We're going to be talking about this. I'm going to be talking about this until I transition off the planet, right? Because this is my thing, right? So that's the FAQ, the 2 FAQs. Now we'll have time only for one SAQ. So remember, the SAQ is the should ask questions, right? So these are the questions that people would ask if they knew more about Jeet Kune Do and they knew what to ask, right? So the one that I picked is, what makes Jeet Kune Do different from other martial arts out there, right? So on the surface, I think one thing you can say is that, and I take this from the title of this book, right? Which way do you go? The Art and Philosophy of Bruce Lee. So Jeet Kune Do is both a martial art and it is also a martial philosophy. So that means that we're going to have a physical aspect to it, and then we're going to have a, let's call it psychological aspect to it, right? Or an external aspect and an internal aspect, right? Which you'll remember that Bruce Lee himself talked about that right at the beginning, right? Again, page 68. For those of you at home who are following along, right? On page 68, it's the explanation of the JKD emblem. And it says, let me see the section that I'm going to read to you. The common mistake of most martial artists is to identify these 2 forces of yin and yang as dualistic, the so-called soft style and the firm style. Yin yang is one inseparate force of one unceasing interplay of movement, right? So it's okay. I'll put it this way. So if a person riding a bicycle wishes to go somewhere, He cannot pump on both pedals at the same time. In order to go forward, he has to pump on one pedal and release the other. So the movement of going forward requires this oneness, right? Dig this. This oneness of pumping and releasing. Pumping is the result of releasing and vice versa, each being the cause and result of the other. Things do have their complementaries, and complementaries coexist. Instead of mutually exclusive, they are mutually dependent and are a function of the other. You can apply that. You know, we were talking about earlier that there's martial art and there's martial sport. Well, obviously these two are going to be complementary with an E and complementary with an I at some point, right? Because they are connected to each other. Striking and grappling are complements of each other in the martial art world, right? So you're always going to have these ideas, and because this is a thing about free flowing ideas, there's always going to be discussion and debate, and there's always going to be disagreement, right? And that's why I've said in other broadcasts that that Jeet Kune Do is probably one of the world's greatest democratic experiments, right? Along with the creation of the United States of America, right? Because we have to be willing. So I, as a Jeet Kune Do instructor, I have to be willing to entertain the opinions of people who might not even agree with me, right? So as I look through the list of people who are on here, right? So Kenny Malden is on here. Sean Foon is on here. Sean, I think, is connected to a guy that I admire greatly, David Chang of I almost said the South Beach. It's not South Beach. David Chang, South Bay Jeet Kune Do, I think it is. Forgive me, Sean, if I messed that up, because I'm from Miami, and so we talk about South Beach all the time, right? But David Chang is a guy whose work I have watched a lot, right? And we have very similar backgrounds, I think, because David's instructor is Chris Kent, and Chris Kent is one of my immediate seniors in JKD. Anyhow, so we're not supposed to be talking about. We're supposed to be talking about what makes Jeet Kune Do different, right? So I just want to say that part about the bicycle, right? If you can't see how the pumping and the releasing aspect that Bruce Lee is talking about in that explanation, if you can't see how this applies to different martial arts, right? Like in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for example, or maybe even in Filipino Kali, then you're kind of missing the point. Because JKD is about, partially about the, yes, George Foon. Oh my God. Sorry, guys, forgive me. I'm having a little flashback moment here. George Foon, the publisher of Know Now Publishing, right? So for those of you who don't date back 30-something years with Dan and Asano, you have no idea how, sorry, I'm getting so excited. You have no idea what a debt we owe to Know Now Publishing for putting out these great books, right, back in the day. This is when this is the time that I fondly recall when JKD ruled the planet. Right. Anyhow, let me Sean, thank you so much for coming on. So I'm gonna read you a little bit more, right? Because a big part of the understanding comes from having a knowledge of the history, so that you can see where Jeet Kune Do was at back then. You can see where it came from when you look at it today, like I was just explaining about Know Now Publishing, right? And also how it applies or how it has influenced what is going on today, right? So I'll read you, this will be the last, and again, look at who published this. Know Now Publishing Company. You guys have no idea, right? Sean, again, thanks for showing up. You just made my evening. I'm going to be on a high until like midnight tonight or something. All right, so this is Chris Kent and Tim Tackett's Jeet Kune Do kickboxing book, right? So I'm going to read you something from page 7, again, for those of you at home who are following along, right? So this is way back here in the introduction. And it says, while one cannot learn Jeet Kune Do from a book, you can gain helpful insight into some of the training methods used to develop different qualities required to become proficient. Well, that exactly relates to the criticisms that we get for offering the Quick Skills series, the volumes that we've made and the volumes that we're developing, right? Nobody is saying that you're going to be able to learn everything that has to be learned about Jeet Kune Do, right, from a DVD series. These things were put out before there were DVDs. That's why we're talking about books, right? And even if it may be true that there is no such thing as a definite method of fighting, there is still a definite training progression, a direction to get from point A to point B. So if you understand that, right, I know with my accent it might be a little bit difficult, but if you understand that, so this is the thing that was written by Chris Kent and Tim Tackett, and this one is copyright 1986, so that's 32 years ago. This is why I tell you guys it is important to know your history of Jeet Kune Do, and it is important to go back to the old material, because the gems of knowledge and information, a lot of them exist in written form back here, and it can really do a lot to spend some time with the old vanguard, right? Then let's see if I can find the other part here. Right, yeah, so here's what they write. What we give are learning experiences rather than technique upon technique. The emphasis is placed upon the continual building up of precision, rhythm, synchronization, while augmenting speed progressively. Right, so we're talking about attribute development, okay? So by providing drills and variations in drills, you provide the learning experience. But yes, the total picture cannot be experienced just by book reading or video training, right? Then there's another section. This is page 7, I think it is. By limiting the tools to be used in the training session or manipulating the environment in which the training takes place, we create learning experiences which can develop different skills at different times. Well, geez, right? I mean, come on. That says it all, right? Let me read it again. By limiting the tools to be used in a training session or manipulating the environment in which the training takes place, we create learning experiences which can develop different skills at different times. One is limited only by one's own imagination in creating the different learning situations, right? So that's in the introduction, right? So I'll finish up today because we're going a little bit over time. I'll read you from the history section, right? I think, yeah. So let's see. As in athletics, to comprehend what a martial artist does, to appreciate how he pursues his art, you must understand the art. You must speak the language, right? So that could very easily relate to the phenomenon, let's say, of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? In order to understand the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athlete, right, you've got to experience the art yourself. Right, so before 93 and UFC 1 and the explosion of BJJ, the Jeet Kune Do clan was already doing that. The Jeet Kune Do clan was trying to understand the Muay Thai athlete. Let's call them athletes, right? Or we'll call them martial artists, right? So they were trying to understand Muay Thai as a martial art. We're trying to understand boxing as a martial art. And Bruce Lee in his time before the modern JKD era, right? The Pencak Silat, the Filipino Kali. Sorry about that. I forgot to turn off my do not disturb, and a phone call came in. So let me read this stuff quickly so that doesn't happen again, and I don't mess you guys up. So here's what it says. That is why Jeet Kune Do has remained a mystery so long to so many people. It is one art, but it expresses itself in many languages. You dig that? It is one art, but it expresses itself in many languages. To know it, you must study it and observe it, not for weeks or for months, but every day for years. Even with knowledge and training, more is required. Maturity and a deep comprehension of combative principles are necessary. If you guys don't have this book, this cover obviously is the original '86 cover, but I'm pretty sure that that Unique Publications they have the current updated edition. But I'm pretty sure that all this stuff is still written in there, right? So what is so time consuming is not so much the mastering of each of the individual elements involved, but understanding and embracing the total concept. It must be understood, it must dictate the plan for training and permeate every hour of the martial artist study. Now, Chris Kent, if you guys know a little bit about Chris, I think Chris was 16 years old when he started harassing Dan Inosanto to let him join the Backyard Group. Right, so I think that I mean, I don't know exactly whose words these are, but when I think about what I know about Chris Kent, and then I read something like permeate every hour of the martial artist study, right, I can see how intense a kid at 16 years old he must have been, right? I will read 2 more sections and then we got to go, right? In a time of narrowing expertise and specialization, the JKD practitioner is the super all-rounder, right? A martial artist whose speciality is the overall picture. Ha ha ha, right? So again, this was written 30-something years ago. So now when you think about, when they talk about people whose ability, right, is so well-rounded, right? Because they can do the stand-up fighting and they can do the ground fighting. It's nothing new in the Jeet Kune Do world. It's more popular now. It's become mainstream. Jeet Kune Do is not a thing that ever became mainstream, right? The incredible diversity of combat means that JKD training is intentionally general in scope. That's why in the old days, so my old student Kenny from Jacksonville is on here. Kenny might remember when back in the Kendall School, we came up with the phrase Master Jack. Because a lot of people who criticized Jeet Kune Do back in the day were like, oh, well, you guys dabble. You guys do a little bit of this and you do a little bit of that. And I try to point out to them that everything it is that we do, we end up doing a lot of it because what we're looking for is the blend, let's call it, or synthesizing what it is that we're doing, right? So I came up with the term Master Jack. Right, so the next time that somebody tries to insult you as a Jeet Kune Do practitioner and talk about how you're a jack of all trades and a master of none, you just tell them that. Well, that's because you're not aware of the concept known as Master Jack, right? All right, so, okay, I don't want to take up too much more of you guys' time. So, once again, Jeet Kune Do kickboxing was a reference point, art and philosophy, as always, and then John Little's, where is it, commentary on the martial way, right? Let's just cut it there. This is I want to thank everybody for sitting in live. We'll pin it to the top of the page afterwards, and please like and share and comment with your Jeet Kune Do colleagues. Come back and see us next week. Check out the Quick Skills series at ilovejeetkundo.com. And see us next week, same time, same channel. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Do Rebel, signing off. You guys enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.